Welcome. I'd really appreciate if you could drop a comment with your thoughts and reactions as you listen. Your feedback helps me craft better stories for you. Breath ragged, I stagger back, feeling the splatter of blood. Not all of it mine, cooling on my face. The relentless groans of the undead echo in the makeshift arena, a chilling soundtrack to this grotesque dance of death. I can't afford to think, only react as another one lunges at me, its teeth bared in a ravenous snarl. But how did I get here? 2 years earlier. The flyer was almost laughable in its optimism, a safe haven in a world gone mad. It proclaimed in bold, hopeful letters. I remember scoffing at it, the idea that any place could promise safety in a world overrun by the undead. But desperation and loneliness have a way of gnawing at your skepticism. I tucked the flyer into my pocket, a tiny ember of hope in a world shrouded in despair. Back in the present, I dodge a swipe from a decaying hand, its fingernails caked with dried blood. The crowd's cheers are a distant roar, their faces a blur. Their faces a blur. They're here for the spectacle, the primal thrill of life and death played out before their eyes. But for me, it's survival, nothing more. The journey to the haven was a blur of exhaustion and fear. I had traveled for days, navigating through abandoned towns and overgrown roads. The world I once knew was now a graveyard of civilization, with remnants of the past haunting every corner. The haven was located in what used to be a small, secluded town, now fortified with barricades and watchtowers. As I approached the gates, my heart pounded not just from the journey, but from the uncertainty of what lay beyond. Would I find sanctuary or just another form of hell? Now, as I parry another attack, I can't help but laugh bitterly at my past naivety. The haven did offer sanctuary at first. A warm meal, a bed, the company of other survivors. It seemed like I had found a rare oasis. But the cost of this sanctuary was steep, far steeper than I could have ever imagined. As I plunge my makeshift weapon into the skull of another zombie, a part of me wonders if I was better off outside these walls. Here, I'm alive, but am I really living? Or am I just another pawn in a twisted game? A spectacle for those who have lost their humanity to the apocalypse? And as the sun sets on another day of survival, I know one thing for sure. This isn't the end of my story. It's just another fragment, a piece of a larger, more terrifying puzzle that I'm yet to fully comprehend. The arena is a cacophony of terror and excitement, a stark contrast to the deceptive calm of the haven when I first arrived. As another zombie lurches towards me, its grotesque form a twisted shadow of humanity, I'm forced to focus, pushing away the memories that threaten to overwhelm me. But memories, like the undead, have a way of creeping up on you. 3 months earlier, the haven was a revelation, nestled amidst the chaos of a world overrun by the undead. It stood as a beacon of hope. The tall, reinforced walls painted a picture of security. And the people. They were alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. Children played in makeshift playgrounds. Gardens flourished under careful tending, and communal meals were a time for laughter and sharing stories. Sarah, with her warm smile and eyes full of empathy, was the embodiment of the haven spirit. We're more than survivors here, she told me as we walked through the compound. We're a community, a family. We look out for each other. I found comfort in her words, in the normalcy that the haven seemed to offer. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something resembling a life amidst the ruins. Now, in the arena, that hope feels like a cruel joke. Each thud of my weapon against the rotting flesh of the zombies is a grim reminder of the haven's betrayal. The faces of the spectators blur into a single entity, a monster feeding on the violence for entertainment. I see Sarah among them, her expression unreadable. Was she always part of this deception, or did this place corrupt her too? As the days passed at the Haven, the cracks began to show. It started with small, unsettling occurrences. A shift in the way people spoke to me. A sense of unease that crept into conversations. The Haven's leaders, once so welcoming, now wore masks of politeness that didn't quite reach their eyes. Then there were the missing people. One day, they were there, part of our family, and the next, they were gone without explanation. They found a better place. We were told, but the unspoken truth lingered in the air like a foul stench. I remember finding a hidden room one evening, behind a nondescript door in a less frequented part of the compound. Inside, the walls were lined with names, dates, and what appeared to be betting pools. It was a chilling revelation. The Haven wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a front for something far more sinister. The realization hits me as hard as the blows I land on my undead assailants. The Haven was never about saving us. It was about using us. We were not just survivors. We were pawns in a twisted game designed for the entertainment of those who had lost their humanity, long before the zombies ever appeared. As the final zombie falls at my feet, a hush descends on the crowd. I stand there, panting, my hands trembling with a mix of adrenaline and revulsion. I've survived another day, another fight, but at what cost? And as the gates of the arena slowly close, trapping me once again in this nightmare, I realize the fight for survival is far from over. It's a fight for my soul, for what's left of my humanity in a world where even the living can be more monstrous than the dead. The clash of metal against bone rings out, a harsh symphony that's become my life soundtrack. As I fend off another wave of the undead in the arena, my mind drifts unbidden to the days when the true nature of the Haven began to unravel. 2 months ago. It was a night like any other in the Haven when I stumbled upon the horrifying truth. Sneaking into a restricted area, lured by hushed voices, I found myself peering into a room filled with monitors. On those screens, I saw the arena, but not as I knew it. I saw bets being placed, people cheering, and then my own face, bloodied and determined, fighting for survival. The leaders, including Sarah, were there, discussing the performances with a cold clinical detachment. "It's fascinating," one of them remarked. "How quickly they adapt, how fiercely they fight when they think there's hope." I felt a chill run down my spine. The Haven wasn't a sanctuary. It was a laboratory, and we were the test subjects, observed and bet on for some sick form of entertainment and study. Back in the present, another zombie falls at my feet, and I can't help but wonder if there's a camera somewhere, capturing this moment, turning my fight for life into a spectacle. The realization fills me with a burning rage, but also a piercing clarity. I need to escape. I can't be their pawn any longer. The memory of that night haunts me. After my discovery, I couldn't look at the Haven the same way again. Every friendly smile seemed sinister. Every word of encouragement, a veiled threat. I began to plan my escape, but with every passing day, the weight of the truth bore down on me, threatening to crush my resolve. Now, as I stand in the arena, a decision looms before me. Do I continue to play their game, to fight for a survival that's nothing more than an illusion? Or do I use this fight as a means to an end, a way to turn the tables on those who've imprisoned us all in this twisted experiment? A zombie lunges at me, snapping me back to the present. I sidestep, using its momentum to drive my weapon through its skull. As it crumples to the ground, I realize that every move I make, every decision from here on out, isn't just about survival. It's about rebellion. It's about tearing down the facade of the Haven and exposing the truth. And as I brace myself for the next wave of the undead, I know what I must do. The fight isn't just in the arena. It's against the very people who turned our hope into horror. The truth has been unveiled. And now, it's time to act. The moment of my escape was both the most terrifying and exhilarating of my life. As the Haven's gates clanged shut behind me, I didn't look back. I ran, fueled by a mix of fear, anger, and a desperate hope for freedom. 2 days earlier, the plan was simple but risky. During the next fight, I would create a diversion, using the chaos to slip away. I had managed to steal a key from one of the guards, a small, cold piece of metal that represented my only chance at freedom. In the present, I'm miles away from the Haven now, but the ghosts of that place still haunt me. I keep moving, never staying in one place for too long. The world outside the Haven's walls is just as brutal, but at least it's real. At least my survival isn't entertainment for twisted spectators. The night of my escape plays over in my mind. The arena was a frenzy of noise and violence. In the midst of it all, I made my move. The guards were too distracted to notice me slipping away. I remember the pounding of my heart, the sheer terror that they would catch me before I could escape. But they didn't. I made it to the gates, unlocked them, and stepped into the night. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to put as much distance between me and the Haven as possible. Now, as I navigate this new world, I'm faced with a harsh reality. The Haven may have been a prison, but it was also a community. Out here, it's just me. The loneliness is overwhelming at times, but it's a small price to pay for freedom. Occasionally, I wonder about the others I left behind. Did they ever realize the truth about the Haven? Did anyone else manage to escape? These questions linger in my mind, unanswered. And the biggest question of all, what now? The world is still a wasteland, overrun by zombies and devoid of the life we once knew. But there's a sense of purpose that drives me now. The Haven taught me that even in the darkest of times, we have a choice. We can submit to the horror, or we can fight against it. I choose to fight. Not in an arena for the amusement of a corrupt few, but for myself, for my own survival. As I settle down for the night in an abandoned building, I realize that my story isn't over. It's just beginning. The road ahead is uncertain and fraught with danger, but it's mine to travel. And somewhere out there, in the vast zombie-infested wilderness, there might just be another Haven, a real one this time. But for now, I keep moving, surviving, living. I remember the first time I felt it, a tingling sensation in my fingertips, like static from a TV screen. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as a quirk of my body. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of the end. My name is Annie, and this is the story of how I became something else. The news had been buzzing with reports of a new disease, but like everyone else, I never thought it would touch me. I was just a teenager, more worried about exams and friends than some distant health scare. But then the symptoms started. Fatigue that clung to my bones, a constant chill, and an unshakable feeling of dread. Mom noticed it first. The worry lines deepened on her face as she watched me push my food around my plate. "Annie, you need to eat something," she'd say. But the food tasted like ash in my mouth. Then came the announcement. The government was setting up quarantines for those infected. They said it was for public safety to control the spread. But the fear in their voices, the way the news anchors couldn't quite meet the camera's eye, told a different story. This wasn't just a disease. It was something far worse. I remember looking at my reflection, searching for signs of the monster they said I would become. My skin had taken on a pale, sickly hue. And my eyes, there was a hollowness to them. I was changing, and there's nothing I could do to stop it. The isolation began subtly. Friends stopped texting, invitations dried up, and even our neighbors crossed the street to avoid passing too close. I was becoming a pariah in my own community, a walking, talking harbinger of doom. But it was the night I found Mom crying in the kitchen that everything changed. She was clutching the phone, a crumpled piece of paper with the quarantine center's address scribbled on it, lying forgotten on the table. I could see the battle raging within her, the instinct to protect the public, her community against the fierce primal urge to protect her child. She made her choice that night. We would leave, escape to our old farm, far from prying eyes and judging whispers, a place where I could live out my last days as myself, not as the creature I was turning into. As we packed in silence, the reality of my situation settled in my stomach like a lead weight. I was infected, a ticking time bomb of contagion and violence. But in my mother's determined eyes, I saw something that gave me the strength to face the coming days: unconditional love. That's where my story really begins. On a remote farm, hidden from the world, with a disease coursing through my veins, slowly stripping away my humanity. And the worst part, I was painfully, terrifyingly aware of every moment of it. The farm was a relic from a past life, a life where the biggest worry was whether the tomatoes would ripen in time for summer. Now, it stood as our sanctuary, a place where my mother hoped the world could forget about us. And maybe, just maybe, we could forget about the nightmare my life had become. Each day blurred into the next. The disease, like an uninvited guest, made itself at home in my body. My skin grew paler, almost translucent, and my veins stood out like dark, twisted rivers against the stark whiteness. I avoided mirrors, unable to face the stranger staring back at me. Mom tried to keep things normal, or at least as normal as they could be under the circumstances. She'd talk about the weather, the farm, anything but the elephant in the room. My transformation. Meals were quiet affairs, with her stealing glances at my untouched plate. I knew she was worried about my declining appetite, but the hunger that gnawed at me wasn't for food. Nights were the worst. I'd lay awake, listening to the sounds of the farm, the creaks and groans of the old house, and the rustling of creatures in the underbrush. Inside me, there was a different kind of restlessness, an unsettling feeling that something was waking up, something primal and uncontrollable. I started to notice changes in my senses. Sounds were sharper, smells more intense. I could hear the scurrying of mice in the walls, the distant hoot of an owl hunting, and the smells. The earthy scent of the forest, the mustiness of the old house, and something else, something that made my stomach churn with a mix of revulsion and anticipation. Mom noticed the changes too. I caught her watching me with a mix of fear and sorrow. She was losing her daughter, and in her eyes, I saw the pain of that loss. But she never wavered in her resolve to keep me safe, to protect me from a world that would see me as a monster. We rarely talked about what was happening to me. It was an unspoken agreement, a way to preserve the fragile peace we had carved out in this isolated world. But the silence was a heavy cloak, smothering and inescapable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood, Mom sat down beside me. Her hand, warm and steady, found mine. She said, her voice barely above a whisper, "No matter what happens, I want you to know that I love you. You're still my daughter, no matter what." Tears stung my eyes, a reminder that despite everything, I was still human. But for how much longer? As the darkness crept in, swallowing the last light of day, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was also swallowing the last remnants of the girl I used to be. The transformation was no longer something I could ignore or hide behind a veil of denial. It was there, in every part of me, consuming what was left of Annie. The girl who loved music, who dreamed of traveling the world, was being erased, replaced by something hungry and feral. My senses were now a twisted gift. I could hear the blood rushing in Mom's veins, smell her fear mixed with the lavender scent of her shampoo. It was intoxicating, a siren call that beckoned to the darkest part of my being. Mom tried to hide her fear, but it was there, in the way her voice trembled when she spoke to me, in the way her hand shook as she prepared our meals. Meals that I could no longer stomach. The very sight of food made me nauseous. But another hunger, a more primal one, was awakening within me. The nights were a battleground. I fought against the urges, the alien desires that threatened to overwhelm me. I would lock myself in my room, curl up in a corner, and try to hold on to the fragments of my humanity. But with each passing night, those fragments were becoming harder and harder to grasp. Then came the night when everything changed. I woke up to find myself standing in the middle of the living room, the moon casting eerie shadows through the windows. Mom was asleep on the couch, a book fallen from her hands. I stood there, watching her, feeling something uncoil within me. The urge was overpowering, a tidal wave of need that washed away all thoughts of love, of right and wrong. I took a step toward her, my body moving on its own accord, driven by the hunger that had taken root in my soul. But then her eyes fluttered open, and the spell was broken. The horror of what I was about to do crashed into me, leaving me breathless with self-loathing. I stumbled back, a strangled cry escaping my lips. Mom was awake now, her eyes wide with terror. "Annie," she whispered, her voice a mix of fear and confusion. I couldn't answer. Words were beyond me. All I could do was run, flee into the night, away from the woman who had given me life, who I'd almost... The forest was a blur as I ran, branches tearing at my skin, the ground uneven beneath my feet. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in my heart. I had almost heard her, my own mother. The realization was a bitter pill, a confirmation of what I was becoming. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually exhaustion took over, and I collapsed under a tree, gasping for breath. As I lay there, staring up at the stars, a single thought echoed in my mind. I was a monster, and there was no going back. The night I ran from the house, something inside me broke. The thin thread of hope that I clung to, the belief that maybe, just maybe, I could hold on to my humanity, snapped. I was no longer Annie. I was the thing they feared, the monster in the dark. When I returned to the farm, the sun was rising, casting a pale, sickly light over the world. Mom was waiting for me, her eyes red from crying, a shotgun in her trembling hands. It was a surreal tableau, a scene that would have seemed absurd just a few months ago. Now it was our reality. We stood there, mother and daughter, separated by more than just the few feet of dirt and grass. The chasm between us was filled with unspoken words, regrets, and a love that was being tested in the most brutal way possible. "Annie," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't." I understood. The burden was too heavy, the danger too great. She couldn't be both my protector and the guardian against what I was becoming. The realization was a cold, hard knot in my chest. I nodded, unable to find the words. What could I say? That it was okay. That I forgave her. Words were meaningless in the face of the inevitable. She raised the shotgun, her hand steady now. This was the final act of love, a mother's sacrifice to save her child from a fate worse than death. But as she took aim, something stirred in the woods. We both froze, turning towards the sound. Figures emerged. People, but not like any we had seen before. They were like me, transformed, lost to the disease. In that moment, the world shifted. The choice was no longer just about me. It was about survival, about facing a new, terrifying reality. Mom lowered the shotgun, her eyes meeting mine. There was a new resolve in her gaze, a fierce determination. We were no longer just mother and daughter. We were survivors, allies in a world that had turned against us. The story doesn't end with a bang or a whisper, but with a question. What happens when the world you know crumbles? When the line between human and monster blurs? I don't have the answers. All I have are the moments, the memories of who I was, and the uncertain path that lies ahead. As Megan and Paul walked through Winfield Cemetery, the orange glow of the setting sun cast over the tall headstones made them look scary. Even though it was not cool outside, Megan was shaking. Even though the sun was going down, something didn't feel right about this place. "Come on, slowpoke," Paul yelled back. "I want to check out the old house before it gets dark." In order to catch up to her careless brother, Megan sped up. There was a graveyard next to the Winfield house, which was said to be haunted. She wished they hadn't dared to spend the night there. But Paul never gave up when he was given a chance. As they walked, sounds of branches breaking and leaves moving around filled the mausoleums and crypts. Megan's heart beat fast at every sound. In the time it took them to get to the mansion's broken, down marble steps, it was getting darker. Paul tried the old broken door, and it opened with a squeak. "Looks like someone's home," he joked, giving Megan a sly grin as he went inside. She paused on the threshold and peered into the darkness. "Paul, I think it's time to go. This place scares me." She jumped back and let out a scared yell when she heard a sudden crash from inside. But Paul was the only one who came back out laughing. "I scared you, didn't I? Megan, get out of here." Though she didn't want to. She sighed and followed him in. Inside was more disturbing than outside as the light was going out. Wallpaper came off in ragged strips, showing plaster and lath that were falling apart. A thick layer of dust covered the broken furniture that was lying around in heaps. Moving things in the far corner caught Megan's attention as her eyes got used to the blur. She spoke up to warn Paul, but then she saw the people. An older man and woman standing next to a teenage girl holding a toy animal. "Evening," the man said in a rough voice. Couldn't help but hear the noise. "My name is McAllister. This is where I work as the sheriff." Paul took a bold step forward. "My name is Paul, and this is Megan, my sister. To be honest, we were just taking a look around." Megan looked at the people with suspicion. The woman had kind eyes, but she looked tired, and her braided hair was coming loose. The girl tightly hugged her bear and looked at them with fear in her eyes. It was clear that something was wrong here. Before she could ask, howls came from outside in the middle of the night. They were neither animal nor human. All the people in the room shook together. "What was that?" Megan spoke softly. The gun was drawn by McAllister. "What a great night for a dare, you kids. It looks like you'll be here for a while." The angry cries came again, this time closer. As darkness fell on the world outside these walls, Megan's fear grew. No matter what was going on, it looked like there was no way out. At least for now, they could only hope that dawn would save them from the night's horrors. The group huddled together in the grand hall and looked at each other with unease as strange howls filled the air. With a grunt, McAllister pushed a beat-up couch toward the door. That should keep him out a spell. Megan held on to Paul's arm and wished she could feel better. He walked away and shook her off. "This is a bad place to be. I'll help us get out of here." The girl, Lucy, as McAllister had called her, gasped when a board creaked upstairs. Elisa, her mother, softly told her to be quiet. "Honey, it's just the wind. Now stay close." McAllister gruffly said, "I'll check it out," as he loaded his shotgun. Megan thought back to his frightened eyes. Whatever was making this place so scary must have hurt him more than anyone else. It was someone who came out of the dark. "I'll be there. We have a better chance if we look out for each other." Harry, an outdoorsman who had come here to stay safe earlier, had a tight grip on a hatchet. McAllister looked at him coolly and nodded. Their steps got quieter as they went up the grand stairs. Lucy sobbed into Elisa's waist. "I want to go home, Mama." "Soon, sweetheart." Elisa calmed down, but her pale face sent a bad message. A groan came from below, which caused a chorus of shudders. Paul walked over to an opening and looked down the shaky steps that led into the darkness of Stygia. Maybe there's another way. Megan told him, "Don't even think about it," but he didn't listen. Paul smiled wickedly and slipped into the abyss. While following him into the void, she cursed under her breath. Even though danger was closing in on them, her brother's laugh could be heard all the way ahead. The exciting stories his dad told him had shaped him in this way, but now his carelessness put them all in danger. Megan fumbled for her phone, which gave them a faint light. The basement was a maze of falling walls and broken furniture, with more cobwebs than she cared to think about. She was drawn in even more by a different sound. Her name hissed in reptile venom. Paul. A moan, not her brother's, filled the room with thick, sad pain. Megan slammed into the dirt wall out of fear. In front of her stood a figure in a death grip, its skin peeling off of its bones. Its bloody, hungry face turned toward her, but there were sounds of living things below the blood. Megan let out a high-pitched scream as she was shocked and sad. Was this poor person now one of the animals that were inside the house? If so, what horrible things did they do to the group above? As she realized the truth, her legs shook and bile rose in her throat. Whatever was stalking the hall was just a prelude to the real evil that lived here, in their own hearts. Megan jumped out of the basement and almost hit Paul as he ran down the hallway in a panic. The screaming risen soul ran after it, grabbing at the crumbling stone with its hands. McClister and Harry came out with their guns drawn, but Elisa was the fastest to act. She threw a broken chair leg right through the shadow's head, showing her anger. The thing slouched and let out a final guttural breath. Megan gasped for air as she talked about the horror and stuttering glimpses in the ringing quiet. But there was no comfort to be found. All that was there were pale, frightened faces that showed how violated they were. Harry's brow was wet with sweat. In those halls, there are demons, and who knows what else. We need to protect ourselves and get materials quickly before it gets dark. He gave McClister a mean look, and McClister tightened his grip on his gun. This is the law's territory, and I say we stay put until dawn. Not worth putting lives at risk in the pitch. In order to avoid becoming too soft, Harry spat. You look like someone who cares more about keeping things in order than keeping people safe. Order isn't going to save us tonight. McClister charged at Harry and slammed him into the wall with a growl. Boy, are you calling me a coward? I already lost enough than to bury more of it. Harry pushed him off and grabbed his hatchet. Don't waste any more time. The people I care about need me to get back. Outside, there was a crash, and then a sad howl that made the blood boil. Elisa put her hand over Lucy's ears, and her face was twisted with fear and sadness. Paul and Mike gave each other a loaded look, then rushed the shaking great doors together and opened them a crack. Megan could see scary shapes gathering at the edge of a nearby wooded area through the thin film. Antlered limbs scampered and split apart as more people joined the growing group. A single red eye shone where there should have been none, twisting her insides into dead strands. The teens slammed the door shut and blocked the entrance with their shaking hands. Mike yelled, "It won't hold," and looked at Tamara with a frantic look that said more than words. They were just kids thrown into a nightmare while they were awake, and it was getting dark quickly. McClister and Harry kept arguing until they could no longer reason. So Megan gave up and fell to her knees. It looked like there was no way to stay alive in the wild imagination outside the house. And if the people who lived there turned on each other, there would be no safe place left at all. At night, the house was shrouded in thick shadows. Even though Elisa begged them not to, McAllister and Harry looked at each other with daggers. We're all scared, but fighting doesn't make things better. There needs to be a middle ground. After a long time, McAllister gave in with a tired nod. I think you're right, ma'am. Harry, I'll take charge. If there are any problems, I get to say what to do. Do you agree? Harry had angry eyes, but he knew that this fight wasn't worth more lives. I agree. Let's move quickly before it's too late. Coming up with a plan took hours because of the scary whispers outside. To keep the dying dawn going, people would have to be brave and make sacrifices. When it got dark, McAllister woke up the tired group. It's time, kids. Harry and Elisa, you're in charge of the south side. I'm going to lead Mike. Paul, you and Tamara are in charge of the back. Megan, go stay with Lucy. We move when I say so. Megan gave Paul one last hug, her heart in her throat. Keep yourself safe, brother. Come back to me, please. He tried to smile, but fear was visible in his eyes. As the ink-black night fell, the survivors crept out into it with guns and hatchets raised against the sounds of ghosts. They made their way through the twisty woods by moonlight that was cloudy, fearing each branch that would break. In front of them, McAllister stopped and then fired. Eldritch bullets hit their target, sending screams through the air. Harry and Mike swung next to each other, their axes shining with deep songs. The swarm appeared out of the fog, its arms and legs twisted and its mouths open wide. Megan held Lucy close and mumbled prayers as the attackers hit their circle harder. Paul's short cry could be heard above the noise. By the time the chaos was over, only Tamara was left standing over his bloody, badly damaged body. No, Megan wailed and threw herself on his broken body. Mike put a gentle hand on her shoulder before she went crazy. I'm sorry, but we need to leave while we still can. She looked into his kind eyes and decided what to do. They should live because Paul would want them to. As dawn broke over the empty plain, the hurt survivors finally made it out of the twisted woods. Behind him was a sea of crooked trees that hid sins without names. There was salvation's light ahead, and they would hold on to the future with all their might. Even though the dark might always follow them in their dreams, they found strength in each other to face even death and walk toward the morning.